Well, I spent some time this weekend doing some pleasurable reading, and I'd like to be joined now by the author of the book that I pleasurably read. She is Michele Chynoweth, and her new book is called The Wise Man. She's here to tell us a little bit more about that and about what she does. Hi, Michele. Welcome back to Seize the Day.
Hi, Gus. It is great to be here on your show.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to have you here. Now, I was talking a little bit earlier, Michele, about you and about sort of the genre that you have taken on writing, about taking biblical characters and events and setting them in modern day circumstances. So tell us a little bit about that, how all that got started, and how it is that you come up with these ideas.
Okay. I write contemporary suspense novels that reimagine Old Testament stories in the Bible, full of intrigue, drama, mystery, and a little romance. And I call them edgy Christian fiction or edgy inspirational fiction. And I got started when I wrote my first novel, The Faithful One, based on the book of Job, in God calling me to write this book. And I look back now and see that at the time I was in a really dark place. I was losing felt like I was losing my kids who were becoming teenagers, going through a bitter divorce, losing my business at the time. I owned an ad agency, and, there was a recession back then in the 90s, and was losing my health through the disease of alcoholism. And I got this idea driving along, still small voice, you should write. I had written another novel that never saw the light of day, and I heard a still small voice. Now I know it was God saying, you should write a contemporary novel based on the book of Job. Now, I was familiar with the Bible, growing up Catholic, but, I thought, why? And I argued with God, but didn't let go. Wrote that first novel. It pulled me through all of that. I ended up on the other side like Job, and today I'm married to a wonderful man. We have a great relationship with our blended family of 5 adult children now and 2 grandkids, and working as an author, living my dream, and as an editor and book coach as well. So my publisher at the time, a small Christian publisher, was doing a line of reimagining Bible stories in contemporary novels. And I said, well, that's what I believe I'm called to do. So I wrote the next one based on David and Abigail the Peacemaker. I could relate to Abigail. She goes, she's originally married to a not so nice guy. I was going through a bitter divorce. My friend suggested Abigail. So that was The Peacemaker. The Runaway Prophets, based on Jonah. That was my next novel. And I was still fighting God's call like Jonah does, and did a Bible study on Jonah. So that I just hear these ideas from God that, they just spark in my imagination. And then The Jealous Son, based on Cain and Abel. I had have 2 sons that have that sibling rivalry, and they're in a rock band in the book, and my sons were in a rock band, and one gets the girl and the fame, and the other becomes jealous, and it's a murder mystery. And then this one, based on Solomon. So I can tell you a little bit more about it. So that's how these ideas come to light, and God puts them on my heart. I ran into a Solomon-like character and based it on that. And I also, you'll see he becomes a Supreme Court justice, and they look at Roe v. Wade, overturning Roe v. Wade, just like ripped from the headlines. And I did a March for Life in 2020 when President Trump came to speak, and I was really moved by that. And I worked that into the plot.
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, first of all, well done. It really is a page turner, and I just couldn't put it down. We're talking with Michele Chynoweth, and her new novel is called The Wise Man. I'm just curious, Michele, this is such an interesting genre. Were you inspired by anyone else? Are there others doing this kind of thing, or have you, is this sort of a first?
There really isn't. I've talked to publishers, literary agents, folks, and I'm in touch with a lot of Christian authors, other authors, and I do a lot of speaking at writers' conferences, and they all say it's unique. I mean, we have Francine Rivers, who does Hosea and, in her book Redeeming Love, but it's set back in the 50s. So this is very contemporary.
Yes.
And it's not like preachy or religious at all. It's like, very, like I said, edgy, in that it takes these issues from contemporary times and you can relate. And I realize now, doing this for many years now, 5 novels later, that I believe what God's calling me to do is get that message from the Bible story across, bring people back to the Bible, because the Bible, my own kids say, "Oh, Mom, the Bible's, hard to read, boring, made up stories," whatever, people say against the Bible. And so I'm just trying to take that message from God and tell it in an entertaining, way that they can take have a beach read there, and or an entertaining novel, a gripping novel that gets across the message from the story.
And you've done a great job. Michele Chynoweth is with us. By the way, her website, michelechenoweth.com, and you can find this new book, The Wise Man, along with her others, anywhere fine books are sold. And I'm Gus Lloyd. Thanks for tuning in here on Seize the Day on the Catholic Channel on Sirius XM 129. So I'm kind of wondering about your take on this, Michele. I'm reasonably familiar with the Bible and the Old Testament stories about which you have written in these. And The Wise Man, of course, is based on King Solomon. What's your thought about folks who aren't very familiar with these Old Testament stories when they pick up your book? Is that would you prefer that they be more familiar with the Old Testament stories, or are you just kind of hoping that they'll dive into the Old Testament stories? What's your thought process about that?
Well, if they are familiar with the Bible story, I think they'll really enjoy it because they'll see those parallels.
Yes.
And they'll be fascinated to know, what does she do with the whale in Jonah, right? In the Runaway Prophet.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's not a whale. But it's like, but I really try to stay true to the story in the Bible, and I authenticate that. I research it through the Anchor Bible series. I have clergy read it for me to make sure it follows the Bible story. And anyway, but those that are not familiar, I'm even more excited to reach them because, like I said, so many people, stop reading the Bible because it is hard to read. It is hard to comprehend. And if they could do it in a way that tells the story, but in a way they love to read because it's, suspense with little romance. That's what I like to read. I think, it gets across to them. They say we don't need to preach to the choir. It's like that. I believe in that it'll reach, we're called as Christians, as Catholics, to evangelize, to reach out. And that's what I hope to do through my novels, to reach people also that don't otherwise hear the message. And they're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
Yeah, one of the other things that I love, too, about your writing is that you take these biblical stories, and again, they're all set in contemporary times. So, you're not going to read about people with wineskins and stuff like you would see in the Old Testament. They're realistic people set in our day and age. And in fact, in The Wise Man, I want to talk about just a couple of things, not, of course, giving too much away here, because I do want folks to read it. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. But I found it very interesting that when you read your stories, you can kind of go back to the stories in the Bible and maybe get a better picture of what those biblical characters were feeling and going through in their own stories, right?
Right. So these characters, the main character, Finn Mitchell in The Wise Man, which, by the way, is a sequel to The Peacemaker because that was based on David and Abigail, right? So David being Solomon's son.
Yeah.
Solomon goes on to become king in his own right. In my book, Finn Mitchell becomes a Supreme Court justice. And we see his journey to get there. And then they are hearing an actual case, and some of us familiar with the Solomon story think of, just like Jonah and the whale, we think of Solomon and the 2 women fighting over the baby, right?
Yes.
So I said, how do I do that in a contemporary way? And I started thinking, they fight over a baby born live out of a failed abortion, a late term abortion that, things go a little haywire and the baby's born live. That has happened before, and very rarely, and especially rarely these days, but it can happen. And I authenticated it with a doctor and nurse friend of mine who have worked in that pediatric units, and they've actually experienced this, broke their heart, and they dispose of the fetus. And in this case, a woman saves that baby, and the birth mother wants it back, who gave it up for an abortion. And they battle it out in the courts. It rises all the way up to an appeal case before the Supreme Court. And Finn Mitchell is on that Supreme Court, and they have to hear that case. And wow, it's like a lot to debate, but that's how it's set in a modern day time.
Yeah, and I'll just say as well, again, not to give too much away, but that's really just kind of the beginning, if you will. If you're familiar with the story of Solomon in the Old Testament, you'll see the parallels where Michele takes this contemporary character, Finn Mitchell, and how Solomon eventually found himself worshiping false gods, and it's a pretty sordid tale. And so she takes that part of the story as well and reaches it to its conclusion. Yes.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Gus. Thank you. So, right, the Roe v. Wade outlook is just part of the book. That's part of Solomon's story. Yes, he goes on to marry someone, we'll say, out of his religion or that isn't faithful to God, that worships false idols. And I do that in a contemporary way. He marries, I don't want to give too much away either, but he marries someone who isn't a believer, and they think love will conquer all, but it doesn't. They have real differences. And he goes on to set up a whole island where they have a virtual reality gaming system and for tourists. And he married somebody, I'll just tell you, from China, and she's, believes in communist China and isn't a Christian, and they clash, and that comes out along the way. And finally, he just, he really turns from God like Solomon did, and he experiences all the heartache that Solomon experienced. Finn Mitchell just, he wants more. And I have to say, I could relate to that somewhat. There's a part of me in all my novels, and, it's, I guess, why I choose the topics and issues, the contemporary issues I do. Everything from, in my novels, from addiction to, spousal abuse to, the list goes on. And in this case, entitlement. Like, I grew up privileged. I went to Catholic schools all my life. I was very privileged, but I grew up with a sense of, my ego kind of got too big for my britches at times. And I struggle with that. I always want more. I want to go right to the, top of the New York Times bestseller list with my first book, with, that I struggle with that ego. And I have realized along the way that if I just reach one person and make a difference, that's what God's asking me to do. And the rest, it's gravy. The rest is great. But I'm writing now I was reminded, for an audience of one, capital Big O. And I struggle with whether to put Kirk Cameron's quote on the back of my book, might I alienate half my readers? And I've realized, no, you need to lean in, and you need to serve God, build the kingdom, make a difference. And it's not about you, Michele.
Yeah. And that's one of the beautiful things too. So that was the first mention of that I did want to bring up briefly here. Michele, of course, Catholic, and comes from a Catholic Christian viewpoint, but her novels are not specifically Catholic. And I think they're appealing to really anybody and everybody. But you got a nice little nod from Kirk Cameron there. Tell me about how that went down.
Well, I met Kirk. He came to Delaware, actually, which is nearby. We're in Maryland over the Delaware line. And he was doing his living room reset tour. going around talking about Christian topics, anything from parenting to, Roe v. Wade. And he has an outfit called Save the Storks. And anyway, we got our picture taken with him. We got up, everybody that attended got to go up on the stage with him and sit on his couch with him and talk a little bit. And I gave him one of my books. At the time, it was The Runaway Prophet. And he said, this is great. And I said, well, I'd love to if you star in my movies. And he's like, okay. And so anyway, some time passed, and now I came out with this book. And I know he's a big advocate. He was the March for Life this year keynote speaker.
Right.
And I emailed him and we talked, and he said, sure, I'd love to promote the book. So he gave me an endorsement, and wow, I was so excited because he's such a nice guy and such a advocate for pro-life. And yeah, I'm very blessed by that.
That's great. Michele Chynoweth is with us this morning talking about her latest book called The Wise Man. It is the story of King Solomon set in very contemporary times. Now, the last thing I have to ask you, and again, we don't want to give away too much. We'd love for folks to get the book. And by the way, I read it this weekend, and wow, just couldn't put it down. Really, really well done. You talk about a Supreme Court decision that may overturn Roe v. Wade, et cetera. It's almost as though you were prescient in all of this stuff. Can you fill me in on kind of the timeline? I mean, had the Dobbs decision already started before the Supreme Court, or did you write all of this before all of this happened?
Well, I do sometimes feel like, God, come on, let's hurry up because, get my book out there, hurry up, because sometimes these ideas, like I said, they just come to me, novelist, fictional, imagination, and then I see them happening in modern day times. It's kind of like a before your time type of feeling. And not that I'm a prophet by any means, I'm a writer, but in all of my books, I've had that kind of like prophetic, for example, The Runaway Prophet has ISIS in America. And I had a terrorist group in Las Vegas, New Nineveh. Jonah goes to Nineveh in my book. Character goes to Las Vegas. Anyway, with this one, Solomon, I years ago started it. And, like I said, I did the March for Life in 2020. It actually all started when I went to Australia. My stepdaughter was an au pair for a very, very wealthy family in Australia, in Sydney. And the heir apparent, one of the richest guys in the world, I couldn't believe it. It was like Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. He very, very womanizer, I want to say, or very friendly with the ladies. He married one of the au pairs, has all of this wealth. And I saw him and I said, there's my character. Anyway, I went to the March for Life, and I started thinking the plot, and I thought, let's get this book out. I knew Dodd was coming. The decision was supposed to be released in June. Now I'm not so sure it will be, by the way, with the leak in May. So I knew my publisher was releasing it May 17th. I'm in conversation with her, and, final touches, ready to go, and lo and behold, the leak. So that,
Yeah.
who could predict that? Nobody. However, I thought, well, God's timing, maybe this is a good thing.
I think on your behalf, Michele, it's a very good thing. As I say, as I'm reading it, I'm like, wow, how did she do this? It's like you were for, and I have to say too, there towards the end of the book, the business that the main character Finn Mitchell and his compadres find themselves in, I think there's something very prescient in that as well. So it's really well done. Do you have anything on in the works that you care to share about?
Oh my gosh! Well, one of my books might be turned into a movie, so I don't think it, but that's the hope. I am working on a memoir next, so hopefully this time next year we may be talking about that. I just want to get this one out and hopefully people will read it and realize, oh, that's what God's trying to tell us in the story of Solomon, in, in Kings, in Ecclesiastes, and in the Song of Solomon. These are the messages. And the message is, what profit a man to have the whole world and forfeit his soul?
Yeah.
And I think we all can relate to that at times, because we all chase those dreams that sometimes veer away from God, our will versus his. And we all need to, every day I try to pray for his will and, let the rest fall, and try to take me out of the equation. It's hard. It's very hard. So, but I'm hoping this book will entertain, educate, and inspire people to hear God's, what God's trying to tell us.
Well, good. You did all three for me, Michele, and I'm very, very grateful. So thank you for your time this morning. So honored to be here. Michele Chynoweth, and again, her website, michelechenoweth.com. God bless, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Gus.
All right.
Take care.
Blessings to you. michelechenoweth.com. So, listen, we're a week before Memorial Day. Did you realize that? Memorial Day is 1 week from today. Hard to believe, right? So if you're looking for a really great little summer read, this is one, The Wise Man by Michele Chynoweth. And again, you can find it anywhere the great books are sold. And you can find her on her website, michelechenoweth.com. If you don't know how to spell it, and I'll bet you don't, then you can always go to my website, gusloyd.com, after the show today and look up the Seize the Day page for today. We will be happy to give you a link so that you can find out more about that.